introduce Sheridan. We're going to have these 5 to 10 minutes intros of each one of our panel. The panel is quite interesting. We have Ben Goertzel. Ben, come say hi. From SingularityNET, co-founder. I don't think this really works, so for me it's more like a thing. But if you could, yeah, let's do this right. I turned it on, not hard enough. If you could maybe introduce what you're doing, where you come from, what SingularityNET is, so that everybody kind of knows what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm now leading SingularityNET, which is a blockchain-based platform for AI. I come at this from the AI side more than the blockchain side, but there's been a bunch of collaborators on the project. I've been doing AI for more than 30 years. I got my PhD in the 80s. I've been doing it in academia and industry in various forms. And I've been doing AI from two different directions for a long time. One is research aimed at building general intelligence. And I introduced the term AGI in 2003 or 4. I've been organizing the AGI conference series since 2006. Then, to earn a living, I've been doing applied AI for companies in all sorts of different vertical markets, in finance, national security, healthcare, entertainment, basically you name it. Now, SingularityNET is a sort of agent system with a bunch of different AIs, each running independently, each one may be created and put online by some other different random person, but then, as with Ocean Protocol, there's a decentralized protocol. They can all talk to each other, they can exchange a cryptocurrency, they can collaborate, and if someone has a service request for some AI work done, they can put that request into the SingularityNET network, and then decentralized mechanisms, peer-to-peer mechanisms used to find any agent in the network that thinks it can fulfill that request, and you can negotiate price, look at the reputation, and so forth. And I had the idea to build something like this in 2000, 2001. I described in a book called Creating Internet Intelligence, but it was very hard to build at that time. And with faster computers, faster internet, smart contracts, and Ethereum blockchain that we're using, it became possible to build something like this. We're putting a bunch of our own AI into this network, which is partly from our OpenCog AGI platform, which itself integrates different things like logic engines, evolutionary learning system, and neural networks around a common hypergraph knowledge store. So we're putting our own OpenCog integrated AI into this network. But being a platform, now we launched the beta of this platform, which is the first sort of scalable version of the platform that I actually would recommend a lot of people to use. And now we're trying to get other people around the world to put their AI into the network to complement the AI using OpenCog and other tools that we've put in there. And we're looking at how do you drive demand for the network. Both by reaching out to entrepreneurial developers who want to use decentralized AI stuff, and by launching spin-off projects. So we're launching a spin-off called Singularity Studio, which is building enterprise software products and doing some customization on top of that, where all the AI inside the products, backends on the decentralized network, and we're spinning off a couple other things, a sort of social network aimed at life extension and longevity, where people can upload their biological data, which is then fed to an AI that tries to learn new longevity therapies. Then if a longevity therapy is discovered, part of the profit goes back to the guy whose data it was. That project's called Rejuve. So we're looking at creative ways to drive demand for the network, as well as doing developer workshops and such to drive supply. And lastly, but not leastly, I've collaborated with Tufi Saliba from AI Decentralized on creating something called DIA, Decentralized AI Alliance. And the notion there is to take projects like SingularityNET, Ocean, and all the others that are doing decentralized AI stuff in some form or another, and network them all together to make a network of networks, or network of networks, depending how deep you want to go.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna have so much more questions for you, so we're gonna deep dive a bit further. We'll also add some sparring partners from the field. What do you prefer? Have a seat in the sofa, chill a bit, and then we go to the next, or you can sit up front here.
Sofa looks nice.
Thank you, Ben. That was amazing. Atsushi, you want to go next? So here is Atsushi. He's specially from Japan, from Tokyo. I know these guys already for a few years now. They have a project called Couger and Connect Home. It's all about creating your virtual human assistant. And Atsushi will explain what they're doing, why they're here.
Yes. Our product is named Connect Home. Let me show you the video. We are building some kind of the virtual human assistant with using AI and blockchain. Let me show you the demo. Richard, come over here. It is for the AR.
Good morning,
AR
Richard.
mode. With tablet.
It's already noon.
And virtual human
yes.
knows the situation. And the rectangle is virtual human detects the object.
Is it a suitcase?
And
Yes,
it's
it's
suitcase. And some chairs or
It's a chair.
Yes, it's chair. Richard, come over here.
Yes.
and she can communicate with human using
Come over here.
AR.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go to office. Okay.
It is on the co-working space.
Please have a drink.
Yes, she
Alright,
suggests
thank you. I am not so thirsty.
There is
And
someone
also,
there.
but human knows
it
that
is,
there is some people detect automatically.
Co-working space.
It's a chair.
Yeah. Come over here. Richard, come over here.
Yes, and also it is on the big monitor, and actually it's okay. And the German TV program is coming to our office, and the person is from German TV program, and she is asking to the budget engine, and there's a camera detects my face automatically, and budget human is answer.
Hello, Atsushi.
Hi, Richard.
Looks like we have a visitor.
Yes, I am.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Nice to meet you. I am Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Where are you from?
I think this demo speaks for itself. How many Rachels are in the room right now?
Have you been to Germany?
10 Rachels.
10 Rachels around us. So we're gonna need to put on our Rachel goggles to see her. So you're also you're taking this concept onto decentralized substrate. You're making blockchain implementation. What would be the purpose for that?
Yes, I think the now AI interface is very limited, and I think the more natural interface is human-like interface. So we are building human-like interface, and at the same time, the modules from Rachel, from the AI module is decentralized, and people can create their original project human agent. So we will build in the marketplace, and she is very.
How old are you?
That is a secret.
And she,
Where are you from?
I'm from Shibuya, Japan.
What do you do, Rachel?
I am working at
Yeah,
Couger as an assistant.
assistant.
I can provide some assistance for you.
What's your hobby?
I have started to learn dancing recently.
Oh, can you dance for me?
Signal dance.
Okay, I will try.
She can. Perfect. So with this marketplace, Rachel can become better on the service, more intelligent, more equity.
Yes. So,
Thank you.
You are
Yes.
welcome.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to explore some of the views you have. So maybe you can join them on the sofa and we'll have a discussion.
Yes. Actually, we collaborate the workshop in Japan, and of course, our platform is also decentralized, and we'll be connected to the SingularityNET, and it is for emotional recognition. She copied the human's face and smiling. Now he become angry, and also sings gender. So as I explained, we will building this kind of virtual human marketplace. Creator can create your original virtual human agent, and also the designer can create your visual and 3D models, and AI developer can provide say AI modules such as natural language or computer vision, something like that. And of course, we will connect to the Ocean Protocol and SingularityNET. That's my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, it depends who we're gonna.
Tech would be good.
Yeah.
Tech.
So Tech, come join us.
Sure.
Tech has been, I'm gonna cheat a little bit, but you're a partner at Zeroth.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit like who you are, what Zeroth is doing,
Sure.
how this is connect to this topic of decentralized AI?
Right.
So maybe if you speak really closely,
Yeah.
should give some
No worries.
noise.
So I'm a partner and founder of Zeroth. So I created it about 3 years ago. So before I was in London. I ran Techstars in London. So I see some YC shirts. I've sworn entity. So I ran Techstars London, which is the first Techstars overseas program, and then I went back to Hong Kong, where I'm originally from, and I wanted to create an early stage ecosystem in Asia, but really focus on early stage machine learning startups. And so 3 years ago, we embarked on that vision. We started a program in Hong Kong. Now we have 3 programs, and we funded 60 startups. We have Tokyo office, we have a Tokyo program, we have a Bangalore program, we have a Hong Kong program. We're looking to invest in 200 to 300 startups in Asia for the next 2 years. So for us, right, the macro interest, if you will, is machine learning, but with a very, very strong focus on Asia. We think that's primarily where the growth will be in the next 5 to 10 years. We think lots of interesting applications will come out of that particular side of the world, and we just want to go down that rabbit hole.
I'm definitely going to be interested in asking later on in the panel a bit about what's the cultural differences there, like how do they approach machine learning techniques, AI techniques versus the Western world? Does it conflict or does it merge? Or?
You want to answer now?
No.
Oh, okay.
Just anyway, that's something I want to explore later.
Okay, cool.
So, thanks. Thanks. Yes. Do we have Peter's?
I think he's still pouring beer, so.
Oh yeah. There's always.
3 more seconds.
You want to use this? I think it's just for recording.
I'm pretty loud. Can you guys hear me back there? Can you hear me okay?
I think it's for recording purposes.
Got it. All right. Hi everyone, I'm Peter Wang. I'm from Anaconda. I'm the co-founder and the CTO. For those who don't know, Anaconda is best known for our open source software distribution collection of Python and R, data science, and machine learning libraries. But we also sell enterprise software, so we've been at the forefront of both doing some innovation in data processing and visualization, data science, libraries, but also at driving the adoption of open source and data science within enterprises. And so it's actually it's very challenging to have a company that has, basically it's like a foot in the enterprise and then a foot in open source. Because the truth is that a lot of enterprises don't actually know how to adopt open source. They don't know how to actually, especially at the enterprise level, it's a completely different landscape than if you play in the innovation space. And actually, despite Dimitri's claim that the title of the meetup tonight was created by Markov chain, I think that actually there's something really essential that we should talk about when we talk about decentralization, democratization. Because once you democratize people, you don't want them all to fight with each other. You don't want them all to stomp over each other, and you certainly don't want them all to re-centralize behind some like total BS strongman, right? You want actually there to be good, positive, generative collaboration. And so, so the title of my little talk here, I guess I'll just run through this real quick. What I've seen happen in the open source world, and what I've seen happen as open source gets more money, gets more enterprise attention, and certainly as open source needs to move to the cloud, or an era of cloud, there are very different denaturing forces that have happened. And so I'm going to talk briefly about that. Many of you may be familiar with the kind of hand-wringing that's been happening in the open source world over the last 6 or 9 months, as different well-known established open source technologies like MongoDB, Redis, and others, as they've seen their business models get completely destroyed by Amazon. And so on the one hand, as an open source advocate, you might say, wow, that's really terrible, because in order to defend themselves, they've all had to change their offerings to be non-traditional open source licenses. We've seen 3 or 4 new kinds of pseudo-proprietary, kind of open sourcey, kind of, but not really kind of licenses appear on top of these things. And that's sort of like a defensive mechanism. But at the same time, if you look at what they're actually doing, like Amazon is well within its rights to exploit the very permissively licensed open source core at the heart of these businesses. And so it's not really an open source problem, it's a business model problem for these companies, right? And so maybe open source doesn't have a problem. But actually, if you look at what cloud vendors are doing and why they have such an interesting position right now, it's because cloud is not about cloud making it easy to use resources, someone else's computer, and all these other things that we think of as geeks. As an enterprise IT person, what cloud really does is it destroys the procurement cycle, completely disrupts the classical procurement cycle, how enterprises buy IT, adopt new technologies. That's completely changed now. For about 15 years I've been doing it one way, now cloud has made it completely different. And so that's what's happening with these cloud vendors. They recognize they're selling storage, they're selling compute, they're selling commodity things, but by offering this turnkey, anyone in any line of business, any business group can use as much compute as they want to without asking IT's permission, that enables and empowers the cloud to completely rebase, these cloud vendors rebase all this IT budget. That dynamic, then in order to exploit that, or not to exploit, but to accelerate that adoption dynamic, they use open source. Because open source actually can be adopted in a self-proof of concept kind of model much more easily. So imagine with Mongo, how many people here have used Mongo or know of it, perhaps? MongoDB or Redis, right? A lot of these open source technologies, Elastic, another one, if they were not free to download and use, if you had to pay $999 to get a trial version, 1-year license to MongoDB, would you have used MongoDB? Probably not, right? Would any of your friends have used MongoDB? Almost certainly not. So these businesses using open source technologies as a loss leader to drive API standardization is exactly what the cloud is doing. The cloud vendors want to carve out mind share, because what's scarce, once technology and software development is commoditized out, and anyone can go and write a little database, or write an operating system, or write whatever, new language. Once the value of that skilled labor is commoditized out, then what's scarce is actually developer mind share. And so now what you want to do is have developers learn your APIs, know how to use your query language, know how to operate and deploy your technology. So in that battle space of scarce developer mindshare, open source is an incredibly effective tool. And so people who are looking at open source and thinking about it only from the perspective of licensing are completely missing the conversation, the whole point of this. It's not about licenses. It's not about, is it a sole vendor, is it not, or whatever. There's a deeper conversation to be had. And so when articles like this are written about the sustainability of open source, it makes me, well, not upset, but I think they really missed the point of the conversation. Because they talk about sustainability. Well, MongoDB had raised tons of money, had tons of developers, Are they sustainable? And if they're not, does it matter? Are they just a failed startup? Or are they a successful startup? Does it really matter? Versus in the case of like data science and data science tools that are near and dear to my heart, tools like Pandas or Matplotlib, they're supported by a very few number of developers in the world. But they're essential. They're essential to billions of dollars of enterprise computing, and they're sustained by 1 or 2 or 3 FTEs on on an ongoing basis. So there we do have a sustainability question. So when we ask about the sustainability of open source, we talk about the viability of open source in the long run, we really have to understand what it is we're asking about the sustainability of, right? Is it maintenance? Is it innovation? What is it? And this conversation is confused and confounded further by the fact that there are 3 concurrent massive transformations that are happening. One of them is the cloud, and the way that enterprises adopt and the way that developers are self-trialing things on the cloud. The next is actually the enterprise adoption of open source has been building for the last 15, 20 years almost, and it's become quite a thing. So a lot of businesses now will actually use open source, which seems really strange to us because I'm sure here in Berlin at a decentralization meetup, open source is a natural thing, right? But in a lot of businesses around the world, the use of open source is completely heretical still in 2019, but that's changing. And then the third thing is, of course, data science and machine learning. And in that space, open source is where all the innovation is happening. Most people that are doing data science are not sitting around waiting for SAS or MATLAB to release some new library or some new model 2 years from now. They're reading research papers, they're going to conferences, they're downloading code off GitHub, and they're using it the next day. So innovation in machine learning data science is happening in open source. So that actually leads to a very, very interesting point that I want to make, I don't hear other people making, which is that open source is actually, there's 2 flavors of it that I see. There's the traditional, what we call traditional Unix, ponytail, sysadmin, neckbeard sort of open source. And all of us, are familiar with these kinds of tools, whether it's VI Emacs, whether it's Linux, Docker, Apache, etc. And that's devs scratching their own itch. That's the usual line you hear about open source is, oh, I scratch my own itch, and it's the same itch everyone else has, and I give it to the world, and it's great, and we're all nerds, and we love using each other's nerd tools. The other side of open source, the open source that I've been kind of in the middle of for the last 15 years, is the scientific Python community. And that's also nerds. Some of them are ponytailed, and some of them have neckbeards, but not all of them. A lot of them, actually most of them, are not computer scientists. They're not programmers by trade. Every single tool pictured here was created by someone who does not have a degree in computer science. It was created by an applied physicist, or it's created by a statistics student, or it's created by an electrical engineer. They're created by people who needed to get software that was useful for them, that wasn't MATLAB, they didn't like MATLAB, and they didn't even know about SAS, most of these people, and they didn't want to write C++, and Perl wasn't going to do it. Python was just good enough. It was just good enough to meet really the intersection of what they needed to self-service and build their own open source tools. And the first initial open source tools they built, the code is crap, right? It was terrible. They didn't know about documentation, they didn't know about testing, they didn't know how to spell testing. I mean, these were people who were they were grad students writing code, sharing with other grad students, and suddenly it turns out to be the infrastructure that runs machine learning in the world, right? But that's a different kind of open source. And in this book, that really great book by Clay Shirky about crowdsourcing, called Here Comes Everybody, he says that any kind of successful crowdsourcing, whether it's Wikipedia, whether it's open source movements like Linux, all of them have stages of maturity when it comes to collaboration in a sense. And the first is the me first collaboration. That's me servicing my own needs. That's the scratching my own itch part. The next stage is being able to talk about what I'm doing with other people. That's mailing lists, that's IRC, open source circa 1997. And then there's collaboration. There's people actually sharing track and SVN repositories and SourceForge, even prior to the modern era of social software development with GitHub and people sharing information on Twitter, we had a lot of collaboration happening, but most open source tops out there, that I've seen. Most open source stops there in collaboration, it doesn't get to collective action. And that's a deeper conversation on why that happens. But one of the things that Clay Shirky says about collaboration is very interesting. He says, it is characterized by people wanting to fix a market failure. So how many of you have ever thought of Wikipedia as a fix for a market failure? How many of you thought of GitHub, open source projects in GitHub as a fix for a market failure? And if it's a market failure of what market? Is it a failure of labor markets, labor economics? Is it something going to blow up? Okay. Is it a failure of, what is it a failure of? But I think it is a market failure. And so when we talk about the open and open source, there's many different versions or flavors of meaning of open. And some people think of it as, oh, it's licensed BSD, GPL, MIT, AGPL, Apache, whatever. It means I can take the code and basically do whatever I want to with it. But others look at it and say, oh, it's actually open for me to go and join this ecosystem community. If I think the maintainer is a piece of crap, I can take the code and build something else with it. I can go and do innovation at my own level, at my own pace if I want to. But a third aspect of open source is that it's open for contribution of ideas. So this particular repository, this library, might sit there for a year with no motion, and then some random high school kid in Tokyo is going to show up and submit a PR that does something amazing. And that happened in the early days of GitHub, the early days of SciPy. That's happened, it continues to happen to this day. And it shows up all the time. And so that open for contribution is actually one of the most important aspects of open source. And so the SciPy and the PyData innovation community, I believe, has been an incredible collaboration that has outpaced and out-innovated even capitalism in terms of leveraging human capital. So for the last 20 years, the people in this space, even though they're not certified, trained professional software developers, they're a ragtag crew of assistant professors and postdocs and grad students, they have managed to build a network, an ecosystem of libraries and projects that work with each other, right? And the way I describe it is, if you give a bunch of 5-year-olds 3D printers, and then at the end of a day you come back, at the end of the day, they've all, not just, you would imagine, okay, even if they could use 3D printers, maybe one would print a rocket, another would print a dinosaur, a third would print various other kinds of things. But you come back at the end of the day, and what they've done is they've 3D printed themselves a compatible set of Legos. And they've used Legos to build dinosaurs and rockets and little guns and catapults. And it's like, wait, how the hell did that happen, right? Because that is a kind of compatibility that does not naturally emerge without some kind of forcing function. Some kind of ethos, some kind of knowledge or wiring or language or something in those people cause them to create almost like a cellular, nice, tight fit. And that is something unique in the PyData and the Python ecosystem that I've seen. And I think it stems from a few of these kind of core values that we have in our projects. And my challenge, it was built, okay. And the key aspect I realized was that the PyData and the SciPy community, as they do open source, that open source has been pursuing innovation. But a lot of the Unix tools and kind of infrastructure sort of open source projects that we see, they tend to solve well-known problems, but they do them in somewhat innovative ways because it's one or two people doing a new project at this point in time. So it's a new project, a new database, a new memcache object store, whatever, but it's still solving kind of a well-known problem. So this difference between pursuing innovation. Oh, sorry.
I just want to
one more slide.
One more slide. Yeah.
Yes, or one more build.
And then we have
and then we'll have the
conversation,
panel. And so the last thing is that I would say it's important to understand that the market failure we fix with open source are two different kinds. One is a commoditization side where the labor market is now one or two people can write a compiler, one or two people can write a database. We don't need to pay Oracle millions of dollars for one. On the other side, there's open source fixing the market failure of a lack of innovation from traditional vendors. They have millions of dollars, thousands of people, but they're not motivated to innovate anymore, right? MATLAB, SAS, these are very expensive, well-capitalized companies. They were not producing innovation that was sufficient for a grad student. So the grad student went and took some Python code and built their own thing. They built NumPy, they built SciPy. And that is something I think incredibly important for us to recognize in this space as we build these centralization technologies, as we try to have all these different competing frameworks and visions come together to build the next generation of tools for AI. We need to understand that for that to be successful, we have to always keep in mind that what's going to be successful is not one project or one framework or one vision, but a network swarm intelligence. And so I would encourage everyone to, backing up to this slide, think about what are the principles and ethos we have to have in this space. All of us think we're smart. All of us think our projects are really cool. How do we make sure that we don't let our own obsession with some of these things crowd out a network swarm intelligence? So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very curious to see, everybody here has a reason to enter into the decentralization space, or to think about what does decentralization bring as a secret ingredient to the stuff we are currently doing or the status quo we see in the world. For example, at Atsushi, you're creating a virtual human assistant. I think those things exist out there. We can imagine a lot of these similarly like AGIs running on centralized computers. In which portion of your development or your product or your user group do you think that decentralization actually matters?
Okay. Yes, I think now, current time, AI is very centralized and only few big players provides black box AI. So our project is maybe the AI engine is can be more personalized and the use case is more flexible, and I think maybe any creator can create their original own AI agents. That's why we create this kind of.
I think you touched something very important there, where you basically have the seed of origin and the attribution towards creators being at the core of what you guys are developing.
Yeah.
So building a virtual human assistant of a lot of Lego blocks coming together, but each Lego block has attribution to the actual designer of it or the people, the working group.
That's right. Yeah.
Ben, a question for you maybe is, I know you've been a strong thinker in the AI community for a long time already, so you basically have a vision that's probably miles ahead of many people here and inside of the world. What's the end state? So let's say wherever you think this technology that we're developing, and then especially the stuff you've been doing, what's the end state?
The end state, none of us can know, obviously. But that's like asking cavemen on the verge of developing language and fire, what's the end state? You're not going to foresee Facebook and the differential calculus. So, the point is we're in the process of creating AIs that are an order of magnitude more generally intelligent than us. And then those guys will lather, rinse, repeat, right? But we can only see a certain distance beyond. But from the point of view of everyday human life, like we're seeing now, I posted something on my personal blog recently. I was thinking, so what if you could imagine a singularity is reached, and then you have two choices. One, you can mind upload yourself to become one with the global intergalactic mind matrix, just upload into the superhuman thinking machine, or you could remain in a sort of modestly updated version of your human self, like get rid of stomach aches and headaches, maybe give a hash table lookup in your brain or something, right? So the funny thing is, from the point of view of your human self, I'd be like, okay, fork myself. Okay, it's done. Okay, so now what happened? Some fork of me went off. In the last 1 second, it has now advanced 10 trillion times beyond its initial form. It has nothing to do with me anymore, right? So that's sort of the end state. You can merge with the super AI and go far beyond the human scale. Or if we remain human, humans will probably be more like the squirrels in the national park relative to AIs that are a billion times smarter than us, right?
So basically,
Or both.
what you're saying is we're building something that probably will outstand human capacity.
Oh, I'm sure, but actually I think the question you asked him was more interesting. Because decentralization.
Well, you can go any question.
Decentralization, I think, is indirectly key to assuring these wildly utopic outcomes, like I was describing, right? So, the best case outcome of a singularity is, nanotech, femtotech, root access to your own brain and consciousness, and then all sorts of things beyond our imagination. And, the worst case is, 1984 plus, right? Or as Nick Bostrom says, like some super AI decides, or I like the way Eliezer Yudkowsky put it. He said, the AI does not love you, the AI does not hate you, but he can use your atoms for something else. Right? So, that's also possible. And what makes a difference? Well, what's on the mind of the first AGIs we create, right? And is it killing, spying, selling, and gambling, which is what betting, on the market, which is what most AIs are doing today, or does it represent a broader view, the goals, aspirations, dreams, and so forth of humanity? So the beauty of decentralization is it's a way to not let the concentration of wealth, power, and influence overtake the development of AI. What I found most interesting, my final point on this is, having developed this SingularityNET decentralized AI platform, we're getting interest not just from geeks and anarcho-libertarian maniacs like ourselves, but we're actually seeing interest from large companies who they don't want to put all their data in some other big companies' databases. I mean, we're actually working with some big companies I can't disclose, but just let me take an example we're not working with. So say General Motors or something, right? They may not want to put all their data and AI processing power in Google or Amazon, because then, I mean, they're at the behest of that large company, which can double their rates or change their API or something. So for the same reason these big companies like Linux, many of them like a decentralized infrastructure better than one owned by some other large corporations. So what's been interesting to me is not only among individuals who want to resist having all their data and their lives controlled by governments and big companies, but among companies who want to avoid being controlled by the dozen tech companies that are starting to control AI. You're seeing an appetite for decentralized infrastructure for AI, and you'll see that more and more. The thing that's holding it back is nothing works yet, right? I mean, decentralized AI is an idea. SingularityNet, it basically works now. It's our beta launch. Ocean is somewhere around the same state, right? So I think once there's really a highly functional decentralized AI infrastructure, and Connect also works. It's good. I visited them in Japan and saw some cool technology, but none of our things are yet at the maturity level of what like Google or Amazon or Oracle has to offer. If they were, I think a lot of companies as well as individuals would greatly prefer a decentralized infrastructure, because not many want to put all their data and processing power in someone else's control. Yet, if you don't have the resources to build it all yourself, decentralized is the other option, right?
So, but currently you're building a decentralized orchestration network for AI agents to basically solve problems that are thrown into this pool, and through decentralization we get like more competitive market rates, we get more crowdsourcing of.
You should be able to get. It should drive the price for commodity AI to the bottom pretty rapidly. I mean, already, if you look at what Amazon charges for image classification, it's like 10 times the cost of running their own server and running the same kind of image classification code on their server. So, but I think also there's a benefit in diversity, because if you look at all the code in GitHub, there's a lot more there than you have in Google Cloud or Amazon AWS AI APIs. And in terms of refreshing of new stuff, there's like machine translation, there's new papers every week. How long does it take before each company using machine translation like either rewrites that code to integrate with their system or decides to connect to a different machine translation provider or something? If you can get the latest code from a decentralized network from some high reputation provider, you're getting more rapid uptake of new AI from a more diverse pool of AIs, and that's how you get the singularity.
So maybe a last question before I continue, and it could be just a number here.
5.
Right. And the question was, how much percentage of these decentralized commodities and resources are actually running on centralized platforms and backends? What's the risk of re-centralization?
Oh, that's, I mean, at the moment, we're working on AWS and on Alibaba, but I mean, this is, after our current development phase, which has 4 or 5 months left in it, this is what our platform team wants to work on. I mean, the beautiful thing is, with all these open source frameworks out there, with the Kubernetes and OpenStack and all these things, like, it is possible to build a decentralized infrastructure. And I met these guys in Groningen at the Odyssey hackathon. I mean, they'd hacked Kubernetes to use Ethereum blockchains underlying governance.
Right,
mechanisms.
guys. Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, I think that's coming, the decentralized infrastructure. But I'm hoping SingularityNET doesn't have to solve all of that ourselves, because this is a quite common need.
Well, the agents in the network will solve it for you, right?
Well, first solve AGI, then everything will be solved. But there's a mutual recursion issue.
I'm going to move on to tech. Thanks. Tech. I love to land you the question, like, for whom, right?
Okay.
Given that we're here, a lot of us with European goggles and maybe some US goggles on, I think that, personally, I think that the emerging user group of lots of the digital tools that we have are not within our European or American boundaries. They're emerging from Africa, they're emerging from Asia. You see a lot of digital newcomers in this space, and if I look at demographics, I can imagine those are becoming a more bigger user group and basically more dominant user group.
I just realized this is an Asia-themed panel.
Yeah, exactly.
You're the minority here.
I'm from Texas. You're in Hong Kong. Awesome.
So, given what the investments you made, the people you talked to, like, for whom are we building these decentralized AI substrates?
Whom are we? Okay.
Long live Chairman Mao.
Yeah, I know, President Xi. For whom are we building?
The glory of the workers.
Yeah, I mean,
The dictatorship of the proletariat.
Well, it could be as simple as saying, for example, you
For whoever will pay for it.
yeah, for whoever.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So yeah, I think that's as a venture capitalist, yeah, it's whoever will pay for it. And so, they're sustainable companies, and they can go IPO like Uber and Lyft, and Zoom.
to give you a
Then he crashed.
I can give you
Crash
a,
Their investors.
I'll give you a bit
If
more
you want, I can
context.
take that question if you want to ask them a different way.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
give you a
what do
bit
you
of
think
context.
about
Like there is in India, there is an ABCD principle. Astrology, there is some Buddhism, whatever the things that we as Westerns don't think like that's a digital thing. But they would incorporate their local culture into the social networks that currently are being digitized. So that's kind of the angle that I took into this question.
So maybe I'll take a couple macro steps up. I mean, I think maybe what you're reaching for is like, how are applications different, and how are startup companies different in Asia, and I guess for whom are you building for, right? Like for what culture and for what use.
Yeah, and especially then the decentralized part.
Yeah. And I guess yeah, again, just to give some context, I mean, I was in London for many years. It's pretty American, and so I only started, investing in companies in Asia about 3 years ago. And so we have offices in Tokyo, Bangalore, and Hong Kong. So it gives us a pretty unique understanding of Japan and India and China. So SoftBank is also one of our LPs as well into the fund. I think the one thing is what we notice is, with companies building applications in Asia, is, yeah, I think from a company perspective, from a founder perspective, it is actually harder to raise capital. So I think, we were talking about this with Ben. I think, the traditional venture scene or the angel scene it's a lot different from the Western world. I know, sorry, this is a technical talk, so sorry.
No, that's exactly the problem. This is always has been technical talk.
Oh, okay,
And
right.
I think it's actually a human talk, right? We are developing tools not to please the technologists, to basically, we have these huge visions of how the future could look like. So I think.
Okay, all right. Well, I've got a beard and I'm kind of jet lagged, so I'll just continue. So I think it's one. I think the venture scene is just, it's not as well developed, and so I think as a founder, when you pitch, it is, you have to kind of know what the audience is, and the audience is very different. I think Asian founders actually tend to be actually very technical sometimes when describing their project, and not as focused on, I think, the user benefit. And so what we find is working with our startups, I think that was one thing that kind of shows up is who is it ultimately benefiting? Who is ultimately is the customer? I juxtapose it like this. I think Western founders are actually very good at bullshit, but technically they're not as strong, especially American founders, right? And I can say that as American. But Asian founders, sorry. But Asian founders tend to be technically strong, but they're not very good at marketing. And look, culturally that makes sense, right? Americans just tend to be bombarded with marketing, so we just know how to market ourselves. Asians generally don't, right? So I think what you find is, I think Korean founders, Japanese founders, I think Hong Kong founders, to some degree, sometimes they can build very good technology, but they tend not to be able to market themselves. I do think, I think one more thing that I'll kind of take on the cultural context, right, is at least investing in companies in that side of the world is how little unity there is. And so it's a source of frustration for me. So there might be great founders in Vietnam, but there's really no capital in Vietnam. So they try to go to Hong Kong and try to pitch. Hong Kong's a relatively international market, but if they go to Japan, right, to try to pitch, it's culturally very different. To go to pitch there and to go to Korea and go to China, it's incredibly difficult. And so when I look at the scene, I wish there was a little more unity in the sense of like where Europe was, right? When I was building my startup in 2011, where there are multiple markets, but it's relatively unified. And so a London startup can go to Berlin and try to pitch and raise capital. We don't have that same type of dynamic yet, still in Asia. There's a sense of frustration for me. It's one of the reasons why I do want to build a platform so that it's relatively borderless and frictionless to be able to pitch and build your company across Asia. Because as a region, my strong belief and conviction is actually that's where the growth is going to be. We will always suffer as a second best ecosystem or third best ecosystem if we're relatively unequal.
Thanks. Yeah, I think maybe something that we can pick up later is to look at purely coming from this as a decentralization point of view, saying that, well, we have technology that works, now we need to change process. We think decentralization might be a good path forward. From my limited knowledge, I've been traveling a bit to Asia and never operated there, but from my limited knowledge is that they have a different type of social structure than we Westerners who are more into the individualistic lifesphere. So you would see a kind of like what I would describe as kind of a paternity, like some kind of like.
Well, in Asia, I mean, not being Asian, but having lived there for 8 years and married to an Asian person, I'd say it's not very unified. Like different countries in Asia are much more different than I thought before I moved there. So like Korea, as one example, is pretty full on into blockchain and decentralization. Mainland China is its own beast, and whatever the individuals there may be into, the government is having a fairly heavy policy toward centralization.
Exactly.
Right?
So I'm trying to figure out if there's like fundamental paradoxes within rolling out decentralization.
Chinese government has many fundamental paradoxes, but that's like its own thing. But if you look in Japan and Korea, that's an entirely different question.
So to answer your question, yes, there is really what unifies North Asia, right? Is really this Confucian. It's basically kind of Confucian system, right? So the Koreans are probably a little bit more Confucian. I think the Japanese are probably somewhat less, and I think the Chinese have just kind of thrown the whole book out the window now, or burned it. And so, but to your question of will decentralization concepts thrive in Asia? I think so. If you take a look at Twitter survived because Twitter survived because they were in Japan, right? DG actually brought Twitter to Japan, and actually that's how they really survived, right? It wasn't the US. Actually, it survived despite the US. They went to Japan. Japan's usage was super high.
Yeah.
It thrived during the earthquakes. It thrived during the tsunami.
Yeah.
So there's a strong decentralization of messaging and identity.
Yeah, I mean Japanese, anime, manga, the
Yeah.
whole art, the whole art
Also-
scene
Yeah,
is there
yeah.
from
Yeah.
anonymous authorship.
Yeah.
Black
So
American
so there might be actually stronger need for decentralization in Asia because of the strong, Confucian traditional kind of mindset.
That's a good point.
Right. So talking about paradoxes, that actually might be true. Whether that's manifested in companies that are interesting, I haven't seen as much. But I do think from a consumer level, I do think there is more of a need.
Yeah, because the investment world in Japan or Korea has its own structural characteristics.
That's right. So from a consumer need perspective, that may be true, right? But from an investment perspective, that might
But
be
that's an
something
interesting point you make that because of the sort of Confucian hierarchical strain in culture, that actually can drive people more so to want something to be decentralized. I mean, that's sort of
Let's hear Peter, before you go into these questions, because I saw that you
You see the smoke coming out of your ears?
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke coming out of your ears. What I'm especially looking for when talking to you is always, I feel like little people in the world have seen the value of open source emerging throughout the last 3 decades. You were there when in the 90s when it started to emerge, and you basically were very successful to building the right tools, capture community, open the community, and make this into a sustainable business that's still up and running.
Shepherd the community, not capture.
Well, at least guide or however you would call it. So I truly feel that you understand what's the value of open source, and you mentioned something very important, which is, I think, open source projects on GitHub, they have convergence of opinion, which leads to stabilized APIs that want to be used by that community. However, the underlying workings of that API that doesn't really matter. That's up to companies can take that into a commodity or at higher scale, but it's the way you talk to these projects that I think is one of the really interesting things that so far has happened to open source. People just have APIs that they can rely on, and they want to use themselves. But when we add decentralization to open source, things change. What would that change in your community or the evolution of of the community that you shepherd or you know so well?
So I actually I realized, for those who don't know, like the decentralization stuff is not really my day job, right? Like my day job is being CTO of a VC-backed enterprise software company that serves a open source community of like tens of millions of people. And the decentralization stuff I really got into actually in the wake of the Trump election result. And I wanted to dig deep, because I'm a physicist by training, and I want to reason from first principles, and I wanted to dig deep into what were the things that led us to, number one, not recognizing this was going to happen, Brexit and Trump would happen, and then number two, are those things structurally challenging for us as humanity? Number three, does the fact that these things happen indicate an inflection point in the evolution of the neoliberal consensus since post-Bretton Woods II, all these other things? And what I realized was that actually, yes, in fact, a lot of things have to change. And so I stumbled into, there are many people here who've been working on decentralization for a decade or more. People who've been working on the cypherpunks, right, since the early 2000s, and the early days of even before Bitcoin became really popular. People have been working on decentralization and P2P and crypto and all these things for 15, almost 20 years. I stumbled into it relatively late, in the last 2 years, but I went in really, really deep. And the reason, I was like, okay, is it Facebook's fault? Yes, but not really. But Facebook, in order to be Facebook or Twitter to be Twitter, had to be centralized because of the web. So is it Tim Berners-Lee's fault? Well, kind of, not really, but Is it TCP/IP's fault? And so I sort of went all the way down. As a physicist, you don't stop anywhere, right? You just keep going. And I realized that yes, actually, the centralized architecture of our computer networking today is the problem. So we have to burn down the internet or rebuild something better. So, but
Von Neumann or
say what?
von Neumann. What's the?
Oh, we're already past von Neumann, right? But the problem here really is if you have a client-server connection, then you intrinsically are going to build applications where it's just a lot nicer and easier to have the state centralized. And so it's the metaphor I use is if in a world you walked into this forest and there were natural trees for habitation, but these trees were all shaped like a panopticon. So the landlord in the middle could see what everyone around is doing. Well, that's very convenient. Why would I change this architecture? I love this forest as a landlord because I can see who is doing drugs, needs to get kicked out. I can see who I need to blackmail to charge them more rent. I can see everything. So the client-server architecture of the internet is really the problem. And so I started with decentralizing the internet as my first, sort of foray into this conceptual space. That's why I'm going to DTN tomorrow and the after and all these things. But I've now, over the course of the last 12 months, come to a different point of view, which is that I think decentralization is the wrong way to talk about all of this. And actually, the way to talk about it is orthogonalization. And that what has really caused, decentralization as a reactionary movement to centralization is okay, because centralization is like, we're all boats in the ocean, and suddenly this like sinkhole opens up, and it's sucking us all in, and it's destroying humanity, destroying democracy, destroying everything. It's good to have decentralization as, let's sail out from this radial center suckage, right? But if that goes away, a vision for the new world is not all of us radially sailing out in different directions. A vision for the new world that should be is all of us just floating around the ocean wherever we want to go, right? So in the same way, decentralization is a useful term now to, pull people together who all see this giant sinkhole in the middle of humanity, but it's not a goal unto itself. It's a means to an end. And so what is the end? And that's how I got to that's why I talk about this open source network collaboration kind of things. I think enabling networked swarm intelligence, enabling parallel innovation, enabling and defending an innovation commons is really, really important. So the role of decentralization, the role of open collaborations, the role of not having one or two companies own all of the AI innovation in the world, the reason why we defend that is because actually humanity is much dumber if we have those centralized things. Humanity is much smarter if every single person is enabled to apply their ideas, their innovations, their point of view. And so there's a great set of economic thinking around essentially the end of product. The very idea of a product. It solves for scale, it solves for returns to investors, it solves for all sorts of things, but the idea that we can have one thing we make and we give it to 1 billion people, one app, the Blue app, 2 billion people, and one guy decides the Blue app should show more baby photos than news. 2 billion people. That's not good. Okay? And so this idea that we can build products, or we should build products, maybe itself is inherently flawed. Now it's one thing if it's like, okay, we don't need 50 million different kinds of cars, okay? A few hundred types of cars for a few billion people, maybe that's okay. So in physical infrastructure, there are physical economies of scale, physical amortizations that make sense to have product. We only need 5,000 types of chairs, not 5 billion. But for knowledge artifacts, where there's not intrinsic scarcity, and actually there's a great book by Eric von Hippel from MIT called Democratizing Innovation. And he showed that even when it comes to, we think about software, like, software like Excel, we get it there, people do Excel, and then they write some macros. They write some custom scripts and things to customize it, and that's okay. But even tractors, applications like products like that, people are able to add on their own innovations. So democratization of innovation is the root motivation for me in all of this stuff.
Thanks. It feels a lot like you've been thinking about technology as a process to connect people, and also the incentives for people to basically collaborate around a shelling point, a community, and ideas.
Yes. Many different shelling points.
So I think what I saw from blockchain, and Trent also advocates that a lot, is that it's actually an incentive machine. It makes feedback loops possible in very complex systems. It targets the primary brain, the little instant gratification monkey in your brain that says that, hey, big brain, do something useful for the system because I'm getting some candy if you do so. So I think we're kind of like entering this and we still only have 10 minutes, so I'm trying to minimize the question a bit, but looking at how this can ensure like local autonomy of networks, self-sustaining networks, resilient networks that are not panopticons that emerge, people can join, fork, get new ideas, evolve, have a stake in the game, have skin in the game. How far are you guys, like, what can you, what's your gut feeling about this incentive mechanism and then the built-in autonomy that's basically native to a lot of blockchain and decentralization?
I'll just answer
yeah.
real quick. One of my favorite quotes from a computer scientist named Alan Perlis, but a lot of really great quotes. He says, "You cannot proceed from the informal to the formal by formal means." And I think your question about who is this for is one of the best questions we should always be asking ourselves. Technology is a means to an end, always. Even good technologies that are user-facing, we need to be thinking about what humanity, what human aspect, what human element are we trying to enable and empower. So when it comes to these kinds of governance questions and this kind of stuff, we should avoid the temptation as technologists to think that we can encapsulate all human conflict in a formal mechanism. At the end of the day, projects fork. Software projects, things like that, things come and things go. We should, I think, always leave ourselves a space to allow that humanity and the human interaction. We should see ourselves as building tools to enable and facilitate better human collaboration, and not tools that displace human collaboration or automate something. Because there's ineffable aspects about what one person might view from an empathetic perspective for a user demographic that someone else may not. And so creating mechanisms that allow us to have that kind of differential evolution is incredibly important.
So I sometimes think about when you mention governance, and maybe I just want to hear your thought about this as well. You could say that mobile was an evolution of bringing programmers to your pocket. Now, blockchain and all these things, I think it gives programmers the ability to build around power, opinion, votes, things that are more subjective and more native to our social interaction and our wishes and our beliefs. That we actually can say that, well, I'm a unique human, I can visually prove that I'm a unique human and this amount of voting power or opinion power I have in the system. How do we avoid that not being exploited? So how can we build building blocks that not predict how the outcome will be, but have self-evolving systems?
So one flaw I do see in a lot of the blockchain projects, even the ones I've very much championed and supported, and there's several of them, there's a tendency for people to be very much in the neocortical layer and not in the reptilian part of the brainstem. And there's a model of human ego and identity of the rider and the elephant. And you're basically 90% elephant and a rider that sort of thinks he or she is in control. All of these projects, all these ideas, the idea that I had agency in this vote, and this vote didn't go my way, or I voted this thing, and this outcome came out to be really shitty, but I'm gonna accept it because I voted, so I'm great, yay. Like, that's very much focusing on the rider on the elephant, not the angry elephant underneath that doesn't care that it voted for this outcome, it's just pissed, right? So I think when we ask about how do we avoid these unforeseen consequences, how do we have robust governance, even when outcomes are contentious, that's a human level problem, not merely a technology problem. No amount of blockchain code running on portable devices will stop a bunch of AK-47s, right? Like, it's, at the end of the day, we live in a human world until the AGI can drive drones to basically target those things. At that point, it's a different dynamic. As a physicist, I would say right now, to first order, all software impacts the world through people at the end of the day. So we should be solving for having escape hatches and a deep sense of humility relative to the firmware, the wetware that runs and all the users that actually use the software. Sort of a non-answer and a cop-out, but you know.
Yeah. That, could you, from what you've seen and the investments in the AI companies you've done, how much do you think would yield a sustainable token economy, and what would be your frame of adoption there? You can just say none and will never.
Well, I mean, so just to give some reference, when you said AK-47, I'm a U.S. Army guy, so I love M16s and M67. So I just give some. So As an I'm an economist by training, so as opposed to physicist. So I think everything kind of drives to zero, at least in terms of. So your particular question is like, how many of the token projects actually will be successful, and then in China?
The one that you maybe know of?
Right.
Or, like,
I
do you see this as a future business model or
WeChat
survival
Pay is a
model?
very successful token.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I look at tokens, right? I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's a supply and demand question, really, right? So whether there's enough supply, and whether there's demand, right? So if there's no demand, the token price will actually. So I don't know. I mean, so to answer the question, I think more specifically, let's just say in China, I think a lot of it is actually driven by what the government wants, what the Chinese government wants to support. I think you'll see a lot more interesting projects. I think in Japan and Korea seems to be moving a lot better. There's more of a thriving ecosystem there. So as an investor, right, I'll probably target those economies. The problem with mainland China is it's so decentralized that if you can't even mention cryptocurrency, right, in China. You can't mention ICOs in China. Because if you do, then like, yeah, your meetup will be rated by the secret police and then right, it'll be gone. So I think that's the thing with doing a blockchain project, I think, in China as well. If you do, go to Hong Kong. But I think as an investor, I'll probably look at token projects. I think in Japan and Korea, I think it's more sustainable or interesting. Taiwan is also pretty interesting. Is that?
Yeah, it's very insightful because what you're basically saying is that the geographic location of the token project really matters to the success of the project and the token.
Even though the secret police don't have AK-47.
Yeah, I know. I don't think the physical location actually.
There's a lot of projects where the whole team is in China.
Yeah.
The token is listed in Singapore or Europe or somewhere.
Yeah.
So
I don't.
it doesn't stop Chinese individuals from
Right.
these projects.
So it's I think it's not the physical location that really matters. It's I think how you understand local dynamics to make it successful. Right. So you could be in mainland China, but
I mean,
not
Matrix AI is in Chengdu.
Let's say physical location towards the demand of the token, right? The people that actually want to consume the token because there is a service attached to it. So if I mean that's kind of the well, if there's no demand, if there's no usage, if there is block demand, then I think it's not so easy to adopt the token model, right?
Yeah. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah,
You have more experience building in Hong Kong.
I guess, yeah. Actually, through his whole response, being in Germany, I just kept thinking of Nietzsche. Man is something that must be overcome. Man is the bridge between animal and Superman.
Yeah.
So at the moment, indeed, it's about serving humans. But on the other hand, what some of us are after is obsoleting humans. Doesn't mean killing all humans with drones or whatever, but it means creating something much more intelligent and powerful than human beings. And yeah, I think it is. However, it is the case. Like right now, there's a lot of popular opinion in favor of personal ownership of one's own data and decentralized control of systems, and there's a lot of people wanting to resist the hegemony of big tech. On the other hand, there's a lot of people liking convenience also, right? So I mean, like TensorFlow, okay, it's philosophically less pure than Theano as a machine learning library. It's not from the university, it's open source, but it's like closed design process and just spat out by Google periodically. But everyone will use it instead anyway because the tensor board is really beautiful and it's a really simple interface. So I do think usability aspect, as he was discussing, I mean, that's probably the key thing missing from the whole decentralized ecosystem. And I mean, SingularityNET, the current betas, it works, but it's kind of using MetaMask in your browser is a pain. A lot of things are a pain. Ethereum blockchains is still very slow, and so is everything else, even though the fast one is right around the corner. So I mean, I think if the usability in terms of speed, user interface, all human factor stuff of decentralized AI infrastructure were there, I think there's a lot of individuals and companies who would want to use it. But when it's more awkward and annoying to use, then you have to be a true believer, right? And I know it's a weakness in me and my own team that we're focused on algorithmic stuff. We're not really UI people, but that's very common in both AI and blockchain spaces,
One of the things that I think user experience maybe could be an emerging thing in incentive schema, or that's what I see open source is really useful for UX on
open
APIs.
source has been terrible at UX. So I mean that's if you look at Linux or something,
No,
it's
not-
brilliant at back-end service.
Not necessarily. That's when you go high up. That's when you really go to user interfaces. We're talking about user experiences, which and the users of open source are developers. So
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, if you're aimed at sufficiently technical people, then maybe Vim is the best UX of any editor.
No, but his point is actually the data
Yeah.
scientists and machine learning experts are not actually developers. So something like TensorBoard is a sufficiently musical Pied Piper to lead people into the cave of a non.
Because now a data scientist is anyone who can write an Excel macro, right? And so I mean that's
That's
who
the
you
danger of
have-
democratization.
But
Your
that's what you
successful
have to appeal
democratization.
to with decentralized AI is someone who they may not have a computer science degree and they may not even remember high school algebra. But
we'll
they
have
do
to
data science.
we'll have
and
to
they
wrap
write
up.
well.
We're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask the same question to both of you guys as a finisher. So let's try to keep it short. What would be a proof point in your project that you would say that personally I think the concept has succeeded? So if you say that if we will connect home, if once we have this, then I'm going to get my badge of I did something very cool. So what would that be?
Okay. So I'd like to talk about the incentive machine you mentioned. I think the decentralized point is of course the incentive machine on blockchain, but I think the incentive is very different from the country and the areas. Yes, as we mentioned, in Japan and China and Europe is different. So I think the decentralized point is we accept many options for the people. So we love the Berlin, right? But also some people hard fork the Berlin, and we love Berlin Classic. But I love Berlin. We talk about Berlin last month. So the world is changing to the digital world, so the everything can be hard fork, and it will be real decentralization, I think.
So adding incentives and surviving hard forks.
I would say, going back for a moment to what Tak was talking about, like in Asia, I mean, I'm an old white guy, but I know a lot of young Oriental people, Asian people, and I mean, the speed with which new things can be adopted and learned, if they work, is incredibly fast there, much faster than in the West. So in terms of tokenomics and token economies, I mean, if something comes out that actually makes sense to use and isn't a pain in the ass to use and delivers value to users, that will be adopted en masse in Asia much faster than in the West, would be my prediction. The problem is nothing really works in a useful way if you're not a geek and a hardcore true believer hacker right now. Once that's overcome, Asia may soar in terms of adoption. So in terms of what I'd like to see, I mean, apart from like a $2 quadrillion market cap, I think that we're after building AGI when the SingularityNET is smarter than me. I mean, by it becoming smart and not me becoming retarded. I mean, I'll be happy. But really, in the nearer term,
2025, 2030?
In the near 2030 maybe, but in the near term, it's about adoption, right? I mean, we want thousands of AI developers using it and we want hundreds of customers using it. And once you have that, then you're in a position where the thing really does become like a DAO, a digital biological organism. Like right now, me and my team at SingularityNET Foundation are pushing SingularityNET. Trent and his team at Ocean Protocol are pushing Ocean. What we want is for these things to be more like Linux, but with a well worked out economic logic, and that these things are growing themselves as like digital biological organisms and evolving together with the the collective mind of the people working on it. So similarly, Connectome decentralized protocol, but being driven now in a centralized way by this guy and his team. So I think what all of us are after is having our software become its own organism, which is growing and going in directions that none of the founding programmers had anything to do with.
So maybe for the protocol itself, the native incentives should be then user adoption and usability.
As that's not only it. There's user adoption and usability, maybe for the protocol, but I mean, getting the community to the point where it's a self-organizing DAO rather than the project of a company or foundation is that's at the core, and what you have to do in the protocol level to cause that to happen is something we're all still discovering. Like Ethereum hasn't done it yet, right? And Bitcoin has done it only by sucking. So
True. So who here sees himself working for a DAO within these 10 years? Come on. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Very good. Thanks so much. A lot of very wide perspective. I would like to thank all the speakers here. Let's have one more beer. We have to, one message we have to leave at. We have to leave now?
Yeah, sorry. So thanks to the panel and thanks to Dimitri.